All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a great crowd tuning in today. Thank you so much for your participation. My name is Asha Shelzo, and I serve as the director of the Health Law and Policy Program at American University Washington College of Law. I'm also very privileged to serve on the board of directors of the South Asian Bar Association of Washington, D.C. And many thanks to SABA DC for organizing and hosting this event today. And it is our pleasure at the law school to provide some support as well. SABA DC is a voluntary bar association dedicated to the needs, concerns, and interests of the South Asian legal community in the Washington, D.C. area. In pursuit of these objectives, SABA DC regularly organizes panels like these, receptions, networking events, and many other public service and community outreach efforts. I'd love for you to check out the SABA DC website. You'll see lots of great educational programming and networking events coming up that are open to the public, and we absolutely want everyone to feel welcome. In particular, our 15th annual Public Interest and Racial Justice Benefit Gala will be held on September 30th in just a week or two. Switching gears to the law school to tell you a little bit about our goals and mission, our goal is to graduate students who are practice ready and connected to rich opportunities in the health law field. Programs like this, experiential learning, an opportunity to really apply the law to practice are the hallmark of our program. We're sharing some information in the chat, which are just several links to get you oriented with SABA DC, our law school, and the many other great free programs that you can participate in, some of which are in person, others are nationally broadcast through webinars like this. We'll be co-sponsoring some programs with our fantastic program on information justice and intellectual property at the law school, as well as the American Health Law Association and the American Society of Law, Medicine, and Ethics. So please tune in for any of those that you would like and share it with your community. A few administrative matters. We are live captioning this event, so please take advantage of that feature if you would like. We also have the chat that I mentioned, which is a one-way chat. You won't be able to post anything in the chat yourself, but please do look at the chat for some links as we go, and as well as some information about our panelists that we're going to turn to in a minute. But we do have a Q&A box, and we really encourage you to post questions or comments in the Q&A box. And we will try our best to keep an eye on that and interject the questions throughout the program, as well as leave a little bit of time at the end for questions. Also know that we have some fantastic expert panelists, and this topic is extremely rich and broad, and there's so many different perspectives on this matter. So we know that we're not going to address all of your questions or even cover all of the really important content. But we know that we are very available to address questions, and our panelists have been so fantastic about offering their contact information, which we'll share in the chat. So if there's any question you want to raise with them or clarification, please reach out to them after the webinar. And so with that, I will mention as well that these slides will be shared with the entire registration list that will be sent next week. We're also creating a resource guide. We know that you'll hear lots of different legislation and guidance and guidelines mentioned in today's webinar. It's a lot to keep track of, and that's exactly our goal, is to try to help the audience navigate and keep track of all of this and make sense of it. So we're going to be putting together an informal resource guide that will serve as a supplement to this presentation. So we will send that to everyone registered next week as well. So please look out for that. So finally, the real stars of our show are expert panelists here and our moderator. So our deepest thanks to Alya, Sulaiman, who's a partner with McDermott, Will, and Emery, Julie Barnes, who's the founder and principal of Maverick Health Policy and an AUWCL alum, as well as Allison Newsome, who's an associate at Taft and has just been a superstar in terms of the leadership of organizing the panel, and who's going to serve as our moderator. So with that, Allison, I'm going to turn over to you, but I'll be here, of course, and available to continue to help out. And thank you all so much for sharing your expertise with us, and a deep thanks to our wonderful audience that are dialing in from all around the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha, and thank you to all the organizations who are hosting and sponsoring the event today. We're very excited to share information about this topic, and thank you to our panelists for sharing their expertise with us today. To give a brief introduction of myself, I am an associate at Taft, Stettinius, and Hollister in the Cleveland office. I work in corporate healthcare law, so I primarily work with providers and health organizations to help them navigate regulatory matters, ethical concerns, and to make sure that their policies are compliant with all of the federal and state healthcare policy. First, I'll go to you, Alya, if you could give a brief introduction of yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alya Sulaiman. I am a digital health partner with McDermott, Will, and Emery based in Los Angeles. And I describe myself as a digital health product counsel. From light bulb to launch, working folks through data use questions, privacy questions, regulatory considerations that apply to different digital health products used in a range of contexts. And these days, a lot of my time is spent counseling folks on developing, implementing, configuring, and deploying artificial intelligence and machine learning based tools. So very happy to be here.
Thank you. And Julie, if you could introduce yourself.
Thank you, Allison. Again, my name's Julie Barnes. I'm so glad to be here with you today. I, as you heard, run this business called Maverick Health Policy. It's basically a business consulting firm. It launched after spending 10 years as a health lawyer, another 10 as a health policy program director at think tanks, or serving clients as a consultant or in-house federal policy advisor. So we help our clients understand how to navigate the fast-paced federal health IT policy landscape, like interoperability and price transparency, and not the least of which now, artificial intelligence. So you can check us out. It sounds like you have resources on each of us, but maverickhealthpolicy.com will get you started on what we do. Thanks, Allison.
All right, thank you both. So everyone tuning in, we have a few poll questions that we'll be sharing throughout the presentation today. And to get us started, we wanted to share a few just to get a sense of who's joining us in the audience. So our first poll question should be on your screen now. Which industry category most represents your organization or the clients that you represent? We'll give everyone a few seconds to respond. Yeah, it looks like physician provider is steady in the lead, and followed by digital health and then payer. But a nice mix today. Okay, then moving to our second poll question. This question is for our legal professionals joining today. For legal professionals, what is your practice setting? Law firm, government, in-house corporate, NGO public interest, public health, or student in academia? All right. You're seeing a good balance there between law firm, government, in-house corporate, and students and those in academia. So very broad mix and audience joining us today. And then our last initial poll question is, how familiar are you with the current AI healthcare regulatory landscape? So coming into this presentation today, where do you stand? Would you consider yourself a novice on these matters, well-read, but with a surface level awareness, very familiar and actively engaged, or an expert? Okay, so a good mix again, a fair amount of novices and well-read. So thank you for joining us today. We hope to share some new information with you, and that during the presentation today, our panelists can get you closer to that very familiar level and answer a lot of your questions. So we'll move into our slides now, and I'll allow the panelists to share a bit more about their expertise. Okay, so whichever of you would like to answer first, what do we mean when we say artificial intelligence? What types of software programs, systems, and tools fall under that umbrella?
Yeah, I'm happy to get us started. And if you want to advance to the next slide, I think I love this very complicated Venn diagram and oh, actually, maybe it's just me, but I don't see the slides moving.
Yeah, I actually think we could use it in PowerPoint presentation mode, and that might make it bigger as well.
Okay.
And while Allison pulls that up, I'm happy to just kind of narratively get us started. I think the last year almost has been intense. There is some sort of AI headline in every major news publication. It feels like every day, at the very least every week. And the AI that's often the focus of these articles, interviews, headlines is generative AI. And generative AI has captured hearts, minds, but there are a whole range of capabilities that qualify as AI that have actually been used in healthcare for decades in different forms. I kind of think of them as fancy math. And whether you have a really deep technical background in data science or the only thing that you know about AI is how to spell it, there are likely ways in which you interact with AI every day. So, any kind of tool that processes visual data, a computer system that scans and picks out the words in a PDF. If you use a voice assistant, all of those are AI or algorithmic enabled technologies. And when it comes to the legal policy regulatory landscape for AI, I think it's important to remember that we're talking about more than generative AI, large language models that are offered by many of the major sort of technology companies. OpenAI's ChatGPT is a popular one. And we're talking about more than that because the regulators and the policymakers, and this is at the federal and the state level, they define artificial intelligence in their policy frameworks, proposals, and existing laws to be broader than that. In certain cases, there are references to just automated decision-making tools or automated software processes that may not even be fully automated, but just may automate a component of a decision-making process or a workflow. And that tool could magically get scooped up into a broad definition of artificial intelligence. So key takeaway, at least from my perspective, is that it's more than generative AI. But Julie, I'll turn it over to you for your take.
Yeah, and we didn't spend that much time on your initial slide, which has all that great information, but it sounds like everyone will get the slide deck afterwards. This slide is really what you just started to get into. The policymaking level, we're right in the beginning of a national discussion about AI, as Alya said. In fact, Congress is trying to determine how to regulate AI so that it can take advantage of the benefits and we all can feel comfortable that we're mitigating against the very serious risks it also poses. But depending on the type of AI and the application of it, there are varying degrees of risk. And so that is why differentiating between rules-based algorithms and generative AI models is really important. Generative AI, or you've sometimes heard the large language models made famous by ChatGPT, they're trained on these large data sets. They use statistical patterns in data to create new content or make predictions. And unlike generative AI, that can think for themselves or pose novel, complex questions, these rules-based algorithms are very different. They follow predetermined rules and instructions that are encoded in the software. And those software programs, have been used for decades by traditional healthcare organizations for boring administrative tasks that can be done faster and frankly, much more consistently than manual human efforts can bring to those everyday boring operations. In fact, I would say rules-based algorithms can really outperform humans on certain tasks because of the algorithms really minimize human error. They overcome issues like fatigue and burnout and workforce shortages. So generative AI and rules-based algorithms get lumped together under the heading of artificial intelligence. But I think it's important to flag that they pose different levels of risk, which, is important for understanding how best to regulate them. So yeah, I was kind of speaking to that next slide that differentiated generative AI and automation, right? This one.
So you both touched on the various types of AI that exist. What are some of the most current applications of AI in healthcare today, and what applications do we think are on the horizon?
Yeah, if we could pop to the next slide. So healthcare is very prone to thinking about artificial intelligence and analytics as dashboards. And I think what's exciting about the current phase we're in is that we are moving away from tools that admire or describe problems to tools that actually solve problems. And part of what has made that possible is that generative AI, specifically large language models, allow people to use the English language without coding ability or data science skills to interact with these complex models and systems that refer to dedicated sort of databases and knowledge bases, and then extract insights or use those tools to automate, to Julie's point, kind of routine tasks that are really much better handled by rules-based engines or generative AI models than they are by humans. So I think one thing to keep in mind, and if we could just pop back to that last slide, is that the solutions that we're seeing crop up more and more these days that reference sort of generative AI in particular are, I think, focused on moving away from what's considered descriptive analytics, like what happened or why did this happen, to more predictive analytics, where we're asking the question, what will happen and how do we plan for it? So that's, I think, one trend we're seeing with some of the artificial intelligence tools that are used in healthcare organizations, in health plans, certainly, is more of a emphasis on what will happen, how can we plan for it, and ideally, how can we evolve to more of a prescriptive analytics use case where we are, actually using these tools to make certain actions happen that we've identified as really beneficial to patients and the healthcare organizations that serve them.
Yeah, I think that's a really good overview. The next slide is another set of use cases, I believe. Yeah. So, this will be familiar to whoever you are in the audience. These are pretty sort of the typical uses right now. Not much to add, except to say that this first point, the diagnostic AI currently leads the way. That's totally true. That's probably the farthest along AI use case that we've got, and particularly for regulatory oversight, right? So everything kind of sort of peters off in terms of what is being regulated from there. So mostly in drug development and medical devices, you've got a pretty clear path. And after that, not so much in terms of who's saying what's okay and what's not okay in this space. And not much to add to the sort of actual applications than that.
So we get a sense of how pervasive diagnostic AI is. The average person going into their doctor's office, would we expect there to be diagnostic AI in place so that these regulations are going to have a large impact today, or is most of this conversation looking ahead to the future?
I think there's a mix. Yeah, there's a mix. So there are absolutely, and I'm going to incorporate a question that we got in the Q&A into my answer. So, one of the items on this list is chatbots for direct treatment, which by its very nature could have a diagnostic function sort of built into it, right? Where you've got a patient-facing chatbot that is rooting out symptoms, how long they've been going on, medications that someone's on, maybe referring to an existing electronic health record to cross-reference information, and making a suggestion. You may want to consider scheduling an appointment with this specialist, or you may need to go to the urgent care right now. Those are live applications that exist, some of which are based on rules-based engines that, as Julie mentioned, but some of which are increasingly being powered by enterprise large language models that help intake, make sense of, and map responses to different data sets that the model was trained on, or that a healthcare organization has made available. I think that the diagnostic piece is definitely where we see, to Julie's important point, the most formal regulatory frameworks already in place, but we'll talk about this a little later. There are other regulatory agencies than the FDA that and state attorneys general and state privacy regulators that are interested in the use of AI in healthcare in non-clinical contexts, like the administrative side, scheduling, the use in different payment and operations workflows. So I think it'll be interesting to see to watch the development of rules and principles frameworks, and really a rubric for the use of health AI in those other contexts.
Yeah, just to pile onto that just for a second, I think the questioner had a good sort of reaction to, direct treatment. I mean, it's a little startling to think that AI would be, it might be better if that said directing treatment, right? So the chatbots that kind of help people, it's really about, this is what you can be thinking about, or this is where you can go, or that, Dr. So-and-so is available on this day, or you should go to the pharmacy and pick up your thing now. That's, for regular people, direction in healthcare. And that's a chatbot. So that's AI. The other sort of more clinical focus of these things is the, you can have a computer software solution address imaging, right? So they did the mammogram, they did the x-ray, and you have a software program really screen that forward so that you have a much more specific view of, in context of who that person is and where they live and how old they are and all that stuff, sort of pulling from all of the scientific literature to help support and augment a physician's review of that image. Yeah, we're really sort of talking about the future right now of how these kinds of tools can help in the clinical setting is much more about what they're calling clinical decision support. And Alya and I are going to get into this with you all. It's an interesting and kind of difficult subject because it's uncomfortable, but it's totally happening. And it's really about how software is helping with patient intake and getting medical histories down and understanding what is going on in someone's health life and reacting to it in not just, this is what's going on with Joe Smith, but it's also talking about, Joe Smith's background and what other types of Joe Smiths might have wrong with them that might inform the doctor. And that is sort of where we're headed next with what AI might be doing.
That's really helpful. That sounds like it would be a big shift maybe in the day-to-day practice of a lot of providers and healthcare and professionals.
Totally, Allison. Alya already said it's a mix, some places are already doing this today, totally, completely used to it. It's like old. And for other folks, this is just news and not what they do at all. So we're really on the cusp of something in terms of widespread change, but it depends on who you're talking to, whether this is old news or new news.
That leads us perfectly into the next polling question for the audience. We wanted to get a sense of what types of AI programs your clients or organizations are focused on right now. Are you hearing about this diagnostic AI or claims management chatbots? What types of systems and tools are they currently implementing into those settings? A good percentage of all of the above. Okay, so it looks like all of the above definitely took the majority spot. Claims management and chatbots, diagnostic AI are also very popular. So a good mix of people that might say, to your point, Julie, this is old news, or these are things that we've seen and maybe now we're just going to build on. But if it can be said what the greatest impact would be, which of these applications would you all expect to have the greatest impact in the healthcare industry?
Alya, you want to take that one?
I mean, building off of your comments, Julie, depending on the study you read or reference, there are reports that, something as little as 20% of medicine that's practiced today is evidence-based. And we are all patients. Either we have been or we will be at some point, or the people we love will be or have been at some point. And that's a scary statistic. What does that practically mean? It means that the providers that care for you are using, their anecdotal experience, the experience of the colleagues that they have nearby or that they're connected with, to help inform how to treat you. But how amazing would it be if patients that had your similar symptoms that fit your demographics, because demographics can play a role in the delivery of care, how amazing would it be if those reference points were available at your clinician's fingertips, so that they had the wealth of knowledge from other patients like you, expert clinicians in their field with specialty experience to draw upon to help inform your treatment plan or recommendations for you. And I think that's the thing I'm most excited about as a patient. And to the extent that we can add on other pluses, like liberalizing physicians from the keyboard, or making it so that I don't have to fill out the same form every time that I go in for a doctor's appointment, I think those additional benefits and impacts would be great. But I'm most excited about taking evidence-based medicine to the next level by making it easier to tap into all of the incredible data that's been collected and created in the 10 plus years that electronic health records have been on the scene.
That was a great answer. And I'm glad you went first, because it's just kind of and I mean, if I had the answer to that question, Allison, I'd be on a book tour. I would be doing a webinar, but this is, I think what Alya said kind of hits the nail on the head in terms of impact on everyone's lives soon, if not sooner than we all sort of believe. And I think that's definitely a good thing. It's making everyone nervous. And that's what we're going to talk about next, is what you do about this incredibly powerful tool that will help physicians who are, between a rock and a hard place. It is not fair what we're asking them, or medical students for that matter, to learn and know every single day, with the number of new treatments and new medical devices and new things that they're supposed to totally know every day. It's not possible. So we need to help them with this, superpower computer brain to help their brains, operate every day in their world. It's just too complex for them to handle it on their own, like a Norman Rockwell picture. So yeah, let's talk about how we're going to regulate this kind of area, because that to me is a real question mark right now.
Yeah, definitely. Let's move into what regulations and what agencies are currently focused on healthcare and AI. there are several government agencies, a lot of federal policy initiatives that are focused on this type of regulation, implementing AI in the healthcare industry. Is it challenging to keep up with all of the activity? It's difficult to understand how they always work together. So if you could take us through that and help us understand if there's a cohesive approach on the federal level, is there a consensus? What would a snapshot of the federal regulations on AI and healthcare look like?
I can't wait to see what Alya has to say about this, but cohesive or consensus, not adjectives I would use right now to describe the regulatory or legislative oversight of AI in healthcare. I was at an all-day event on AI in healthcare yesterday, and one speaker likened the oversight of information technology to a bag of snakes. I think that's about right. Another thing I heard was that Congress is just getting started. Any comprehensive federal regulation on AI may be 2 to 3 years away. And Congress is working hard to get up to speed. And there's more than enough evidence about that. But it's very cautious. If Congress isn't it, they are being very very cautious because, they're not ready to issue a broad-based regulatory framework for the agencies. They're just not. So all you have to do is look at what happened just this week to know that this is a train in motion. Comments are due today on Senator Bill Cassidy's white paper on AI, which was devoted in part to healthcare uses. He's a doctor, if you don't know who Senator Bill Cassidy is, and he's also ranking on U.S. Senate Help Committee, which has jurisdiction over these kinds of things. We also saw the public-private event U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer held that Senate first closed-door meeting. It was called the AI Insight Forum. 2/3 of the Senate were there. All the top tech CEOs were there. They talked through exactly how it's best to regulate AI, pros and cons. And then Senator Mark Warner, who is a former tech executive, by the way, sent a letter to President Biden this week, basically urging the administration to boost the federal government's tech workforce and hire people who understand AI, because we need that now. So that's all by way of saying this is a work in progress. It seems clear that the agencies like the FDA and the ONC, the Office of National Coordinator for Health IT, which sits at HHS, are already down the road, but they'll continue to be active and they'll follow their path. The rest, I think, will be quite slower.
Yeah, I totally agree with Julie. I think a question I'm often asked is like, when are we going to see that new AI law, that comprehensive law to cover all AI? And what I like to emphasize is that there are plenty of laws on the books that existing regulators have taken the position that, where they're going to enforce them fiercely, especially for the use of AI in the context and the domains where they already perceive that they have authority. The FTC in particular has ramped up its interest in how companies use and access and disclose health information, and the use of health information and AI or machine learning enabled technologies is definitely on their radar. They also are very clear that in recent blog posts that they take an expansive view of the potential harms that could be created if companies are imprecise in exactly what they talk about or how they describe the use of AI in their solutions. And they're also concerned about consumers not being aware of how these technologies may be receiving and using sensitive data. In fact, in a lot of cases, our most sensitive data are health information. On the FDA side, there was guidance that came out, final guidance that came out in September of last year around clinical decision support software. The guidance includes 4 criteria that software would need to satisfy in order to be considered sort of non-device clinical decision support. And it's really interesting because one of those criteria require, really transparency to an end user about how a particular tool came up with its recommendation. And a lot of folks in implementing that guidance and trying to, see where their functionality fits on the line have pointed out that, black box AI models make it really hard to satisfy that fourth criteria. So I think we're starting to see gaps identified in the policy frameworks and frankly, just the old, privacy and data use rules that our industry's been using, relative to how these tools use health data and work in the real world. HIPAA, for example, it outlines certain reasons why you can use health information without, in cases where you don't have someone's authorization. It's not perfectly clear how the use of PHI to develop, train, configure, or deploy artificial intelligence should be classified. Is it a form of operations? Is it a form of research? Is it some other category of permitted use? So again, we're identifying all these gaps, and I think it'll be interesting to see how either through enforcement, new sub-regulatory guidance, in some cases we've got whole new proposed regulatory regimes, like from the Office of the National Coordinator earlier this year. It's going to be interesting to see how all of that continues to develop while Congress, continues its fact-finding, its learning, and its own deliberations on how to approach this technology.
A lot of activity. It sounds like a helpful information and overview. Thank you for that. So we've heard about the promises of AI in healthcare, the benefits, and mention of the risk that exists. We know that there's a lot of regulation on the horizon. Can you talk about top considerations for building an AI, for a system, an organization to build an AI program or to implement it into their routine operations? What kinds of considerations should they have?
I'm happy to start here. So I think the biggest challenge I see when I'm counseling folks on hey, is AI the solution to this problem, is this idea of, well, what's the actual problem that you want to solve? What's your use case? And you would be shocked, or maybe you wouldn't be, I'm sometimes shocked, that there's not a lot of consensus sometimes on what is the problem that we're trying to solve with this tool. And frankly, is AI even the right solution to solve it? I worked with someone recently about a staffing, kind of concerns about the ongoing staffing shortages and challenges in healthcare. And there was an AI solution being advertised to sort of help optimize staffing and identify, how to, scale and make sure that that a healthcare organization could deal with fluctuations in available staff and patient demand. The AI solution, though, couldn't account for the very human issue that, like, on Fridays in the summer, more staff would call off. Right. That was just sort of an issue that was more of a human issue that wasn't going to be solved by AI, and in fact just needed to be sort of identified and predicted as a potential thing that could happen, so that there were more backup flex staff available for Fridays in the summer. So that's just an example to give you a sense that it is worth it to sit down upfront, and before you start talking about all of the issues that may be that you may sort of trip over by introducing an AI system, make sure that everyone understands the problem the same way and has agreed that a technological solution or a machine learning model based tool is really the way to solve it. And then once you go from there, I think that defining the problem has a ton of other benefits in helping to inform what it means for something to be successful, and defining what successful implementation looks like is the North Star to guide you on all the risks and deviations from that definition of success that you want to mitigate as a part of your kind of overall compliance assessment and risk assessment for the solution. I'm curious, Julie, from in this landscape of so many unknowns, what's your take?
Yeah, well, it's, you can answer this question 100 different ways. I think that the main thrust is, what are organizations supposed to do, right? And, what problem are you trying to solve is a great place to start. Also a good place to start is what do you want out of the AI conversation? Do you want to explore how it can help your organization? Do you want to explore how you should be maybe defensive about, what it is that you think regulators might be looking at that they didn't the day before? It depends on why you're asking the question, how you then go about answering it. But I think, frankly, everyone involved in healthcare should be sitting around a table with the right team players, which, it's sort of like the interoperability conversation, even the privacy conversation. You have to have a lot of people in the organization involved right now, because there isn't one human that is in charge of this topic. The IT folks might know the IT part of it, but you need legal, you need regulatory, you need privacy, you need operations, you need sales, you need products, you need whoever's holding the purse in case, you need to pour some capital into what you're about to do next, right? Like, there is a whole team of players at each organization that need to be involved in a conversation that goes something like, okay, now what do we do? And then you need to understand what you're using right now, what you're not using right now in the way of software solutions and AI in all of its forms, and determine who's regulating it and who's not regulating it yet but wants to, and where you lie on that planet. And then, frankly, get some professional help. And I'm not just saying that because I'm one of the professional helpers. I think Alya would agree that it is a beast, and it's not to be taken lightly, and nothing is clear. If it was clear, you could go to some website and find out. It's just not true at the moment. That's a fact. That's not an opinion. So basically, that's sort of my off the cuff advice for what organizations might be thinking about doing at the moment.
Very helpful. So on this idea of an AI policy and making sure that you're considering all the factors involved, there's this term responsible AI that's gaining traction. What does that mean, and how can healthcare organizations and stakeholders maintain those principles of responsible AI?
Yeah, a great question. So there are a lot of principles frameworks out there that purport to sort of outline, the tenets of responsible AI. And my thinking about that is that we're beginning to see some consensus building about what constitutes, sort of the core equity, fairness, et cetera, principles for AI to operate in a way that we feel like reflects our values. But practically, we've got, between the White House blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights and the NIST framework for AI risk management, we've got over 150 pages of principles and abstract guidelines that can be hard to put into practice. So I think one of the first,
not necessarily healthcare focused.
Exactly. Yeah, great point. They're not tailored to healthcare. So one of the things that I like to start with is that if you've gotten to the point where you've decided AI is the solution, I think that being very clear about the data that you're going to use to feed into AI to solve your problem is one of a key first step. Data is central to the development and deployment of machine learning models, and many of the harms and the bad outcomes around AI can be traced back to the characteristics of data sets. So making sure that your organization has invested in good data governance, just as a general matter of course, I think is one of the most important things you can do to set yourself up for success from a responsible AI perspective. And that means being very introspective about the nature and quality of your data sets. Like what purpose were they actually collected for? Do they have predictive value for the thing that you're trying to do? Or are they imperfect for the thing you're trying to do? And maybe that's okay. If you're talking about a predictive risk algorithm, it may operate differently on a population of patients who live in Nebraska than it would here in Southern California where I'm based, right? And that's just a reality that I think we should be more comfortable acknowledging as a limitation of some of our data sets, and just kind of be eyes wide open about how the limitations of data sets, what they were intended for, may sort of roll over into AI deployments.
Yeah, I think I would just reiterate the point, Allison, that there is a lot of top line conversations going on in this particular space, not just at the government level, but at the academic level, which you always pay attention to when things are starting out, right? It's the MITs and other folks of, the world that really do have this sort of, Brookings is another one. You just sort of have this. And so this is what we should do before policymakers pick it up, before it becomes law, before it becomes a rulemaking. So I think there's a lot of conversation in that space, in this sort of what's responsible, what's transparent, what makes sense, what is safe, what is unbiased, what is non-discriminatory. And again, my point is we have to be watching out for that, in particular as healthcare players, because all of those conversations are not happening in the healthcare space. They're happening in the greater AI conversation mostly. So it's there's always a trickle down effect for healthcare whenever that happens. It's an interesting dynamic to be in a particularly sensitive data space where privacy is absolutely primary, whereas other places that AI might live, there might be issues and problems and dynamics, but healthcare is always different. It does not operate like the rest of the economy. It doesn't operate like the rest of the workforce. It doesn't operate like anything else. And it's definitely more sensitive information. So you've just got to make sure that you're tracking those conversations and see what the trickle down effect is for healthcare is what I would say.
As kind of a bullet point guideline, what would you all recommend for an organization that wants to have an AI strategy that's in the healthcare space, thinking about responsible AI and the impact that it could have on their day-to-day operations? What are some of the tools or best practices that they could think about when they're trying to form an AI strategy?
I think number one, build your cross-functional team. That is essential in healthcare, especially because you need clinical experts, you need folks who are on the front lines of care, and you need technologists who can balance each other out with like sort of what they'd like to do versus what's possible with the technology that exists today. You need privacy-minded folks in the conversation who can have, sort of play sort of a watchful role on how data is used in these different deployments. And you really need potentially a net new skill set that we haven't really focused on in healthcare and certainly not in digital health companies historically, which is really someone who's well versed in ethics. And in lieu of like having a chief ethics officer in the conversation, I think once you identify your cross-functional team, creating a set of education for that cross-functional team to upskill them in areas that might not actually be in their direct domain, but give them the context they need so that, when you've got your clinician and your data scientist in a room together, like they know enough about what the other does and what the other is focused on to have a meaningful conversation. Because otherwise, I've been on many cross-functional committees where folks are just speaking totally different languages. And so you just can't get past the superficial into the, you can't get past the coarse-grained really into the fine-grained nature of the problems that we're trying to solve for here. So that would be, I think, high on my bullet point to-do list for an AI strategy. What about you, Julie?
Yeah, that's right. That's what I was talking about before, about getting the team around a table. You put a much finer point on all of it. I think for me, it harkens back to what happened a couple of years ago with interoperability for both plans and providers and their electronic health record system vendors. Everyone had something very, very new to do in the healthcare space, and everyone was confused about who was going to run it and be in charge of it and who was going to be involved. And people would sit around the table and exactly nothing would happen because, again, there was this difficulty in communication that Alya refers to, and it's difficult. So I think what we learned from the interoperability conversations that is applicable to anything about AI, it's very similar, really. You have those disparate, sort of departments coming together. You need to have a facilitator of that conversation so that you're having all of the pre-work done before you get to the table. People understand, the IT folks have to fight their way through sometimes regulatory language in order to understand what the ask is long enough to have okay, well, we can do this and here's how, right? And then they can explain what the heck an API is to, the legal and regulatory folks who are like, okay, why do we care about that? And then explain to the CFO why you have to go buy, a bunch of contractors in order to make that happen, right? Like it is a streamlining of communication on a complex level that, healthcare is not new to complex. It's not new to regulations. It is new to modern IT conversations for sure. So that is a real conundrum that we're going to have to fight our way through until there is somebody who's called the person you hire to, run these kinds of programs and projects within companies. But at the moment, there isn't even a title for that. So you have to have somebody. In my mind, a chief strategy officer, is a good lead on these kinds of things because they kind of oversee, the future, but the business operations and how you can combine the two, and they have to keep legal in mind and that sort of thing. But that gives you a sense of it's not obvious, who really sort of takes the reins and is responsible for these kinds of projects, but definitely important to get that party started.
We have one more poll question for the audience. We wanted to ask, does your organization or the clients that you represent have an AI team or strategy in place? Yes, both a strategy and a professional. Yes, a dedicated professional or department. Yes, a strategy. They're under development, or nothing yet. Okay, it looks like we're nearly in a tie with under development and nothing yet. So that's promising that this is something that a lot of organizations are thinking about. And if you're in the nothing yet category, maybe this conversation will spur that. We do want to make sure we get to some of the questions that are in the Q&A chat. So two that combine well. There's a question about what prevalence you think AI robotic assistance in surgery will have, how commonplace that might be, and whether state medical boards are looking at generative AI and consider that practicing medicine. So how prevalent do you think AI use in treatment will be? And is that something that state medical boards are also looking at regulating?
Yeah, I can start, and I'm curious about sort of on Julie's take on this too. But, look, everyone saw the headlines probably that ChatGPT passed the US medical licensing exam, and, it passed first, and then GPT-4 did even better. And, there's a difference, I think, between passing the exam versus actually fulfilling the state medical board's licensure expectations for a clinician. So I think state medical boards are definitely meeting about AI. I know, there's a federation of state medical boards, and AI is sort of on their agenda. But with respect to thinking of AI as a physician, there are so many implications of that, right? Like we're seeing in the intellectual, like if we look at to the intellectual property law world as an analogy, there are live battles going on right now about whether or not machines can be considered inventors or authors for purposes of copyright and patent law. And the general sense is like, no, these are actually frameworks that exist to protect human creativity and are designed for, for human creativity. I think that the role that AI plays in care delivery in particular will have an impact on whether or not we ever feel comfortable assigning, that practicing medicine label to an AI. At this point, apart from sort of calculator type functions, and there's a lot of training and human in the loop and on the loop that goes into the deployment of AI solutions, or a lot of configuration so that a rules-based engine is actually going off of a set of rules that an organization has identified as appropriate for their clinicians, their workflows, their patient population. So it's definitely something that we could see start to happen. What I think is more likely is that whereas cases like malpractice cases about the standard of care have historically, when they started to loop in electronic systems, it was about you used this system wrong. And as a result, a patient was harmed or a patient died. I think we're going to start to see, and we're already seeing at least one example of cases where the standard of care evolves to, there was an AI tool available to do X, predict the likelihood that my father would have a stroke, and you didn't use it. And as a result, you didn't catch the fact that, that the stroke was happening and there was harm as a result. So that is where I think the conception of sort of a healthcare organization's responsibilities and clinicians' responsibility is more likely to change in the near term, is will not using, trusted, well-researched, well-evidenced AI tools actually undermine your ability to say that you're following the standard of care.
No question. Medical malpractice, right? It'd be a new version of medical malpractice to not use these kinds of tools that are available to you, which is kind of a remarkable thing, but certainly physician leaders are declaring that, already. The answer to the question goes something like, some physicians won't practice without what they're used to now, because they feel like it so much helps their practice. And some folks and I'm sure boards of medicine will absolutely be looking into this quite thoroughly, because we fear what we don't understand. And there's a lot to not understand right now about this. So we're right at the cusp of that. In fact, this week, the University of Texas at San Antonio Medical School announced that their medical students will be able to earn a dual degree, medical degree on one hand, and on the other hand, a master's degree in artificial intelligence. Oh. So there you go. It's starting. I think everyone will get there, but there's going to be a fear factor, for a while.
Yeah. Definitely some interesting thoughts of what could happen in the future. If you could both share your final thoughts before I turn it back over to Asha to close this out. Thank you for sharing, your thoughts and tips on how organizations can implement AI strategy and considerations for healthcare and AI. What would be some closing remarks that you have about regulations or considerations that organizations should take into consideration?
Focus on your use cases. Use your use cases to map your organization's strategic priorities to existing and pending laws. I think, having a focus on what you want to get done with AI is the best guidepost to analyzing what rules may apply to what you want to get done.
This is hard to keep up with. Everybody needs help. We're available. Alya is available. There are people available to you to help with this. And it's one of those times where you're just going to need to augment what's going on inside in order to, do the right thing for your business and your organization next, or your clients. So yeah, let us know what you need.
And I'll add one last final question. Has there been any kind of enforcement of anything when it's so loose and uncertain?
Well, yes. I mean, the FTC, is definitely tracking bad behavior by companies, particularly the ones that are not covered by HIPAA privacy issues. And, we don't we've run out of time to sort of run the gamut on what the FTC is up to, but that is when I talked about defensive measures, that is one of the things to defend against. The FTC is extremely active right now. So that's something I would be watching out for.
And then I would just quickly add, FDA is actively sending letters. So maybe not, sort of, they're not public, but the FDA is actively sending letters to organizations that are characterizing their technologies or their tools in a way that might trigger sort of, kind of a software as a medical device definition.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. I know there's a couple more questions in the chat and you were typing up some answers, so that's really appreciated. Just a deep thanks to Allison, Julie, and Alya for their great expert insights and advice, and also the terrific slides that we'll be sharing with the audience or the registrants next week. And really a great big thank you to SABA DC and AUWCL for helping to put this together. For our audience, please do reach out to these real experts. I know that they'd be happy to address more questions that you may have. There's so much material and the questions were so fantastic. So please do keep them coming as we do wrap up. And we're going to share everybody's contact information again in the chat so you can easily reach everybody. And we do hope to see you at a future event at either SABA DC or AUWCL. Please check out all our programming. Alya, Julie, Allison, thank you again so much. And we're just so grateful to you for you being with us today. And with that, just we're a little over time, so we're going to go ahead and conclude our webinar. Thanks to everyone and have a great day.
Thank you.